Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Benuck, and today is January 7th, 2013. Today's show is going to be a little different in that we're going to look at a subject that we talked about months ago, and we'll see what happens since. You'll notice the second cup here on the table, and that's because there will be a person joining me a little later in the show who will have some comments on what we're covering today. You know, my first show was broadcast on BCTV in June 2011. And the whole purpose of the show was to talk about things that affect us here in Bedford that maybe people aren't familiar with or don't get talked about much, and also to kind of dig deep into controversial issues. And again, with the idea that sometimes we don't really know a lot about some of the controversial issues, so sometimes we only hear that portion which people want us to hear. So since then, about 75 shows have been produced. Those of you who have watched any of them, or a lot of them, or all of them, I hope, know that on some shows I have been very free in giving my opinion. I've been very blunt. Other shows, I have not done that, particularly with the series that we did during the summer and early fall with candidates. On those, I really deliberately kind of held back with my own opinion and instead focused on trying to get the candidates themselves to give their opinions and draw them out so that viewers would know their positions and such. I can honestly say to you, I have worked hard to bring you facts. And I've worked hard to try to get out both sides of an issue when we were talking issues. Now, sometimes that meant we were able to have representatives of both sides, and they would fully state their cases. Sometimes representatives of one side weren't willing to come on the air and be questioned. So in that case, what I tried to do was at least tell you as much as I knew about their position so that you'd at least hear both sides, so to speak. Now, I really took really seriously that my show, I would not allow it to become a forum for people to settle scores or to promote themselves, you know, to the detriment of others by giving out false information, half stories, or by outright misrepresentations. And I genuinely can say that I believe that every guest who came on my show knew that I was expecting them to be candid and honest, and if they weren't, that I'd challenge them. And I think in a couple of cases you saw me do that. Now let's go back a little bit. In March of 2012, Bedford voters went to the polls for a town election. And we voted on a couple of things, not the least of which was the school budget. Did a show on that, so the superintendent and so on could talk about what the budget consisted of, things like the teacher pay raise that had been considered controversial. But probably the biggest thing of the 2012 election was one particular race that was most watched, and that was the race for town moderator between the incumbent town moderator at the time, Rick Bullock, and his challenger, Brian Shaughnessy. I did interview both of them on separate shows, and I think that both of them will attest to the fact that I did challenge each of them. I didn't give them a cakewalk. The town moderator race got pretty spirited, probably the most spirited one I've seen since I've lived in Bedford, and got a little bit personal, I think you could say. And there was a very heavy barrage lodged at Bullock, most notably about charges that he owed a lot of money to the town of Bedford in real estate taxes. And he adamantly denied this, totally and adamantly denied it. And it was not a new issue. Actually, that had been going on for a couple of years. And it really became very public during the early winter of 2012. I mean, there were some billboards on the street, there were blogs, there was another TV show on BCTV that devoted several segments to talking about Bullock and his tax situation. And that's fine. I mean, I had no problem, and you know, off the top of my head, I can't think of the name of the show, and I so apologize, but the hosts of the show were two former town councilors who were very familiar with issues, both very smart men, Bill Greiner and Michael Scanlon, and certainly they had every right to bring up an issue, definitely, particularly if they were right about the issue. I think the only problem that I had is sometimes they sort of didn't stick with the issue. You know, it got a little bit personal, and I don't know. I just didn't like some of the tactics. And I felt it was a little bit beneath them because, as I said, they're both smart, and I didn't think they needed to have nonsense to get their point across. Well, anyway, I decided to do another show with Rick Bullock because, as I said, he was under a pretty heavy barrage of criticism. And I decided to do another show and kind of talk about what I felt were a little bit of the dirty politics that were going on. And I named the show The Dirty Politics of Bedford. And I did have a lot to say about what I thought, about what had been going on during those weeks. But most of the show was handed over to allowing Bullock to address all of these charges against him about him owing taxes. Now, let me say this. I'm not apologizing for that show, not by a long shot. And what I said that I didn't like about some of the political tactics going on, I'll stand behind those comments, and I'd probably say the same thing if I saw the tactics again. But, that's a separate issue. As far as the rest of the show, when I gave Bullock free rein to counter charges that he was a deliberate tax evader, I had an absolute expectation when I invited him to do the show that his comments would be 100% factual. And I made it pretty clear to him that I would hold his feet to the fire if I felt he violated that. Okay? So when I got him on the show, one by one, there were 10 properties in question that presumably he owed taxes on. So one by one, I questioned him about each one of these 10 properties. So right now, what I'm going to do is review that a little bit. Okay? Now, in February 2012, I did check with our town tax collector, Crystal Dion, and I asked her what the town record showed Rick Bullock as owing in real estate taxes to the town of Bedford. And she reported that at that point in time, it had been higher, but as of February 2012, it was $59,514. Bullock did, on the show, say that that sounded about right as to what the town was claiming he owed. But, of course, he said that he didn't know it. So we went by the properties one by one, and I'm going to go through them right now. The first one was land on Pinecrest Drive, and the tax record showed it as belonging to O'Malley Rothstein Realty Trust. The February 17th tax statement of the town said that $6,563.54 was owed in taxes, and that also included 2010 tax arrears. Bullock said that he was only the property agent for that piece of property and that tax bills shouldn't be sent to him. Okay, so we moved on to property 2, another piece of land on Pinecrest Drive. This one supposedly owned, or on tax records is being owned by, I don't know if they pronounce it Teague or Tige Realty Trust. And the February 17th statement said that $3,051.22 was owed on that piece of property. And that included 2010 and 2011 tax arrears. Again, Bullock said, not his problem, that he was only the property agent and the tax bill shouldn't even be sent to him. So then we moved on to the third property, again, land on Pinecrest Drive. This piece of land was registered to Lily Coy Trust, Realty Trust. The February 17th tax statement said that $3,021.52 was owed on that piece of property. Same story. Bullock said that he was the property agent only. The tax bills shouldn't be sent to him. So then we moved on to property at 421 Donald Street. And that property was listed on town records as belonging to Eilatan, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Eilatan Realty Trust. And Eilatan Realty Trust did in fact list Rick Bullock as one of the trustees, which means responsible parties. And on February 17th, that property had tax arrears of $7,911.01, and that also included 2010 and 2011 tax arrears. Bullock said that he had been a trustee, but 2 weeks before the show, he resigned, so therefore it wasn't his responsibility. Okay, so then we moved on to 6 Mary Street, listed as belonging to Starfire Realty Trust. The February 17th town tax statement said that $9,622.69 was owed for that, which included 2010 and 2011 tax arrears. And Starfire Realty Trust showed Rick Benuck as a trustee. Well, Benuck claimed on my show that he sold that property in 2004. He used to own it, but sold it to Starfire Realty. And then he was a trustee, but 2 weeks before the show with me, resigned. So he wasn't responsible for the taxes. Then we moved on to 401 Donald Street. And that one was listed to T period, O period, B period, Roman numeral 2 trust, which also listed Rick Benuck as a trustee. The February 17th tax statement said that $8,037.49 was owed on that and included 2010 and 2011 tax arrears. Now again, Benuck said that he did own that property, but had sold it to TOB in 2004. And while he had been a trustee, 2 weeks before the show with me, he resigned as trustee, so he wasn't responsible for the taxes. Seventh property is at 393 Donald Street, and that particular property is listed as belonging to 393 Donald Street Realty Trust, of which Rick Benuck is listed as a trustee. February 17th tax statement said that $7,723.81 was owed to the town in back taxes that included 2010 and 2011. And again, Benuck said, well, he used to be a trustee, but he resigned, so he wasn't responsible. So then we moved on to property 8 at 2 Mary Street, registered to Creative Entertainment. The February 17th tax statement said that $2,547.72 was owed to the town. Rick said that he was never responsible for the tax payments on that property until February 16th, 2012, which was actually a couple of weeks before the show with me. And then as soon as he found out he was responsible, he went down and paid the taxes. Property 9, we're back to Pinecrest Drive again. And this piece of property is listed as belonging to Lilicoy Realty Trust. The February 17th tax statement said that $6,013.41 was owed. That included 2010 and 2011 back taxes. And again, Rick Benuck said he was the property agent only, not responsible for the taxes. The bill shouldn't be mailed to him. And finally, we get to property number 10, which is 11 Meeting House Road. And that is registered to Meeting House Road, LLC, which has an address registered with the state as 598 Daniel Webster Highway in Merrimack. And on February 17th, the town said that the taxes owed on that was $3,640.24, and essentially that represented the second half of the 2011 tax bill, so one a little more current. Now, it's important to note that 11 Meeting House Road is the personal residence of Rick Benuck, and it also happens to be where his business office is located. In fact, if you drive by, you'll see the sign there. I'm not quite sure. I rewatched the tape and didn't really hear a reason for this, but Benuck said that he wasn't responsible for the taxes for this property that he lived in and has his business in until February 16th, 2012, again, right before the show with him, and that before the show, he went down and paid those taxes and showed me the receipt for it. So anyway, the long and short of it was that Benuck said, after we went through this whole list, he said that the town was notified on February 21, 2012, which was days before my show with him, that he was not responsible for any of these taxes and that the tax bill should be immediately sent to his attorney, not to him at his home and or business address. So, okay, what was the end result of the show here? Well, Benuck definitely portrayed himself as an innocent victim of a very nefarious plot to demonize him by enemies he has in town. And he indicated that Bedford tax collector Crystal Dion had been unfairly treating him for years in some kind of vendetta. Although he didn't really explain why Crystal Dion would have the time, energy, and motivation to have a personal vendetta against him. But anyway, that's what he felt. The show wound up getting a lot of attention, maybe because of the name of it, The Dirty Politics of Bedford, maybe because of Bullock. I don't know, but it got a lot of attention. But in any event, on Tuesday, March 13th, Rick Bullock did lose his bid for re-election as town moderator, and Brian Shaughnessy became Bedford's new town moderator. Now, after the election, Bullock and his taxes kind of dropped out of the news. And of course, I went on to do many, many other shows on many other topics with many other guests. Now, you've heard me refer in some of my shows to the fact that I used to be a lobbyist. And, I guess the nature of the beast, what you do most of your life, you kind of continue to do. And as a lobbyist, even after I was done working on an issue, I always continued to follow it after my work was over to kind of keep track of, what happened afterwards, and if legislation or regulation wound up coming out of it, what happened? How did they work out and so on? What other changes happen? And, essentially, I've kind of done the same with the subjects that I've covered on Tell It Like It Is. My own curiosity makes me want to stay with them and kind of see how they play out, as the months go on. The Bullock issue particularly interested me. And one of the reasons why was because after that show, The Dirty Politics of Bedford, aired on BCTV, I actually received, and I mean, this was kind of staggering to me, the end total after that show, in I don't know, 3-4 weeks after it aired, I received over 1,700 emails, which to me was incredible, about that show from Bedford residents, and an untallied number of phone calls. And for months, literally everywhere I went in Bedford, I mean, I could be at Stop and Shop, I could be at Walgreens or whatever, and somebody whom I had never met before would come up to me and start talking about that show. So it attracted a lot of attention. Well, anyway, back this past November, after finishing this long series of candidate interviews and so on, I started to plan new shows. And I started catching up, trying to play catch up at least on developments with issues of shows we had done, in the months previous. Now, given all the furor surrounding Rick Bullock and his tax issues, I definitely wanted to know what had happened since I did that show with him last February. So I sent an email to the tax collector, Crystal Dion, and basically was shot and asked her if all of these matters had finally been resolved. Now, let me tell you this. I've contacted Crystal many, many times, in the past year and a half or so with questions on lots of issues. I have repeatedly asked her for information. I'm sure that sometimes she'd see my name on her email list and go, oh, God, her again? And, it really needs to be said that she's always responded almost immediately. I mean, sometimes so fast, I'd be surprised. She's always provided the information that I requested. She has answered every question that I've posed to her. Always, 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 always acted in a completely professional manner, was always courteous. When I asked questions related to Rick Bullock and his tax issues, there was never any hint whatsoever of any personal animosity on her part. She never, ever made any comment that indicated anything negative against Bullock. And yet, I mean, Rick Bullock, kind of all over town, has had this real persecution complex over how Crystal talked about him or related issues with him. And I certainly didn't see that. Well, in any event, after contacting Crystal, I learned that since last February, when Rick Bullock came on my Tell It Like It Is show and personally said he had absolutely no tax obligations to the town of Bedford, and all that time, almost a full year, he has done absolutely nothing to back up that claim. Nothing. Now, let me say this. For the town's assessing department to change property records, I mean, they just can't do that because somebody calls them on the phone and says, do it. They have to have amended trust documents, and those documents would show the name of the trustee, which means the responsible party for paying the taxes. Or they could substitute that with a court order that provides them with the information on the name of another trustee. For tax bills to be sent to a different address, the town has to get the request in writing. No big deal. I mean, 90% of the people we do business with, if you want your mail to go to a P.O. box instead of your home address or whatever, you have to fill out a little form or send them an email in writing or something. Now, almost 1 year has passed since, again, I'm going to say it again, almost 1 year. It's now January 2013. Almost 1 year has passed since Rick Benuck made his big public denial of responsibility for any taxes, and yet absolutely nothing has been done to provide substantiation of his claims on my show. Prior to Benuck doing the show with me, his attorney did contact the town to tell them, change the address. Don't send the bills to Rick at Meeting House Road anymore. Send them to me. And he also told the town that Rick had resigned as trustees of the properties. And this was shortly before the show with me. Of the properties, where delinquent taxes were owed. The attorney was immediately informed by the town, by tax collector Crystal Dion, of the need for the documents, what documents specifically were needed in order for the town to do that. And the attorney immediately acknowledged that he received the communication. Now again, this was all prior, within days of Rick doing the show with me. On March 8th, after the show was long done, Crystal Dion again contacted the attorney to remind him that none of the documents had been received by the town. And the attorney responded actually on the same day, saying that he understood, but he was awaiting all of the information from Rick Benuck so that this documentation could be completed. Now on March 13th, as I said, Benuck lost the election to continue on as town moderator. But it also needs to be mentioned here, and I think people forget, that he remains as school moderator. So he's still in an elected position because the school moderator position was not on the ballot for re-election in 2012. So he still is a public official here in town. On April 9th, Crystal Dion again contacted Benuck's attorney saying, we don't have any documentation. Now, he made all his public statements in February, and here it was April. And interestingly, at that point, she also included copies of tax lien notices sent by certified mail to Benuck, which were returned to the town as unclaimed mail. And she received absolutely no response from the attorney. Months go by. As recently as December 13th, just a couple of weeks ago, Crystal Dion contacted Benuck's attorney. All contacts have been ignored. So, tax bills, delinquency notices, certified mail lien notices continue to be sent to Meeting House Road, to Benuck's home and business address, and they continue to be ignored. So here we are, January 7th, I say, yeah, 7th, 2013. And the question is now, well, what about all the taxes on those 10 different properties that I talked about a few minutes ago? Well, let's go back and take a look. Remember how in February 2012, the town said that Rick Benuck owed $59,514 in taxes? January 23rd, that number bumped up because now he owes almost $98,000 in taxes, says the town. But of course, remember, he says he doesn't. Property 1, that in 2012 had a tax arrearage of $6,563.54. That's that land on Pinecrest Drive. Now it's $10,487.18 and includes arrears for 2010, 2011, and 2012. Property 2, more land on Pinecrest Drive, that in 2012 had tax arrears of $3,051.22. January 23rd, now it's $4,872.95 with 2010, 2011, and 2012 tax arrears. Property 3, more land on Pinecrest Drive that in 2012 owed $3,021.52. A year later, $4,835.11 with 2010, 2011, and 2012 tax arrears. Property 4 on 421 Donald Street. In 2012, the tax bill was $7,911.01. January 2013, $12,644.97 and includes 2010, 2011, and 2012 tax arrears. Property 5, 6 Mary Street. Back in February of 2012, $9,622.69 was owed on it. January 23rd, $15,376.36 with 2010, 2011, and 2012 tax arrears. Property 6, 401 Donald Street, February 2012, $8,037.49 was owed. Today, $14,099.88 with 2010, 2011, and 2012 tax arrears. Property 7, 393 Donald Street, February 2012, $7,723.81 was owed. Today, $13,321.40 and includes 2010, 2011, and 2012 tax arrears. Property 8, 2 Mary Street. That was one of the ones that Rick said that he didn't know he was responsible for them until February 16th and unpaid the tax. Excuse me. Back in 2012, it was $2,547.72. Today, $4,835.48. Property 9, Pinecrest Drive again. What is it about Pinecrest Drive? Back in February 2012, $6,013.41. January 2013, $10,552.76 with 2010, 2011, 2012 tax arrears. And property 10, and again, this was one of those properties that Bullock said he didn't know he was responsible for until February 16th, 2012 and paid the taxes. And again, this would be where he lives and where his office is, 11 Meeting House Road. In February of 2012, the taxes owed were $3,640.24, and that represented the second half of the 2011 tax bill. And that one did get paid. He showed us a receipt during that show that it was paid. Well, January 2013, $6,937.60 are owed for 2012, taxes that have not yet been paid. Well, you know, what do you see here? That's what the show's about. What do you see here? You know, we all know that a town's budget is based on the income coming into the town. And we all know, unless we live in, you know, Wizard of Oz land, that the primary source of a city or town's income is obviously real estate taxes. Now, at any point in time, there's a list of unpaid taxes, of course, in every community. Some of them are delinquent. And in tough times, I'm sure that number kind of bumps up. Some of them are on the books simply because, you know, here it is January and people only a few weeks back got their second tax bill. Some cases haven't paid it yet. In some cases, their mortgage companies haven't made the payment yet. But I mean, truth be told, most people want to pay their residential taxes, you know, basically as quickly as they can, because if not, it kind of hangs over you. You know, nobody wants to have something hanging over their home, you know, kind of like that giant rock that's going to drop on your house. If people don't pay their residential income tax right away, normally there's a reason. It's because of an issue, and we all understand that. You know, especially these days, it could be somebody lost their job or had their hours cut or has a horrible new expense, or their heating bill kind of fell behind. It could be because of an illness with ridiculous medical bills, and we all understand that. And on my show, you know, back last February, the Tell It Like It Is show, I said that at one point in time, my husband and I paid our taxes late because of ridiculous medical bills. It was just something we had to cope with. And we all know that if we pay our bill late, we have to pay a penalty and we have to pay interest. So none of us particularly want to do that either. I don't think my argument, or anybody who's watching this show, has an argument with somebody being a little behind or a little late with their residential tax. Because again, nobody does it deliberately. Nobody wants that hanging over them. Less forgivable are realty trusts who don't pay their taxes on time, or business enterprises, going successful business enterprises that don't pay their taxes on time, and who kind of play accounting games so that they have the use of the money, you know, for longer. And meanwhile, the town can wait. I don't have patience for that, and I don't think you do either. Now, you know, Bedford maintains a pretty healthy level of a fund balance, so cash flow shortages are pretty much warded off. But I did raise the question to Crystal Dion a couple of weeks ago. I said, well, what would the town do if all of a sudden, or, you know, over the course of a couple of months, the taxes owed to the town like really got way bigger than normal and was creating a problem for the town to meet its payroll and obligations and everything? What would happen? And she explained that if that happened, what would need to be done is the town would have to issue what they call TANs, tax anticipation notes, to cover the costs until what was owed to the town is collected. And of course, taxpayers would shoulder, you know, the high interest costs of these bank loans. So, I mean, if nothing else, all of us need to be concerned about unpaid real estate taxes because, you know, if that continues and keeps getting bigger, then you and me, folks, are going to pay the cost of that, not the people who are playing games with us, okay? That's one of the reasons why I'm doing a follow-up show on the dirty politics of Bedford, show in which I honestly gave Rick Bullock the opportunity to defend himself against what he claimed were all of the lies being told against him with regard to his tax obligations in Bedford. I bent over backwards to allow him that uninterrupted forum. And almost a year has passed, and he has done absolutely nothing to prove that his performance, and I am going to call it performance, on my show, excuse me, was anything but a smoke and mirrors act. And he still portrays himself as a victim. Now, let me say clearly, and anybody who knows me knows that this is fact. I have made no bones with anyone who came on my show about the fact that if they came on my show and used it to promote nonsense or to hide or misrepresent something that he or she was doing, that I'd call them on it, no matter how long it took. I have made no bones about it. I take credibility very, very seriously. I can handle criticism for my viewpoints. I don't expect everyone to agree with me. I don't expect everybody to even like me or to like what I say. But I don't lie to people. And I will be damned if I'll allow someone else to have me help them with spreading their lies, their exaggerations, or their fabrications. And what else? You know, someone who holds public office has asked us to trust him or her and has an obligation to do what's right. And he or she is not supposed to be gaming the system. Gaming the system. To do so is nothing less than kicking sand in our face. And you know, if we allow it, we empower that person to treat us as fools and to keep on kicking sand in our faces. And of course, we all have an obligation, all of us, we all have an obligation to contribute to the society in which we live and in which we gain benefit. We have to share the cost of educating our kids, even if it's been 30 years since we had a kid in the school system. We all have to pay for policing our town, or having a library, or having a fire department, or having our streets plowed and sanded, and everything else from which we benefit. Now, I know I'd love to have the use of the thousands of dollars I pay in taxes, and I'm sure you would too. Wouldn't it be nice to have that money to take a trip or to maybe buy something that you've been wanting and couldn't afford right now or had to postpone, or maybe even just to put aside a little extra for that rainy day. But all of us know that we've got to pay our taxes. And you know what? It's only the truly arrogant who believe that they have the right to do so only when it happens to suit their purpose. And I don't like that. And I don't think you like it either. You know, Rick Bullock came on my show in February 2012 claiming he wasn't responsible. And now, January 2013, he's done nothing to fix it. Now he owes, presumably, according to the town, $98,000 in 3 years' worth of unpaid taxes, and he has done nothing to fix it. He has instead, though, tried to maintain a public image with his Bedford Positively group, a group that, very small group of a few people. They send out emails every few weeks telling about meetings that we already know about, meetings they have nothing to do with. And they've taken to kind of showing up at events in town that they have nothing to do with orchestrating and such, and taping a TV show. And it's because Bullock tells us he loves our town and he loves the residents of our town. And you know, what I say to that is, you want to do something positively or positive for Bedford, Rick, take care of your taxes. Now, there'll be people, and I want to settle this right here and right now, because I did a show with Rick Bullock back a few months ago. There were people who arrived at the assumption that we must have been personal friends. We weren't. I never knew Rick Bullock until recently. He does not go back years in my life. The first time I ever met Rick Bullock was when I responded to an ad in the paper saying that they needed some extra workers at the polls, and my husband and I volunteered. And for 3-4 years, whatever it was, every election we'd show up at the polls, Rick would say hello to us, we would say hello to Rick. And that was the extent of our dealings with Rick Bullock. But when I started the show and started following issues and such, and all the craziness of the 2012 election was going on and all the controversies surrounding it, that is when I approached Rick Bullock to see if he would do a show with me on the subject. So don't any of you sit there and think, what's going on? Is this one of his friends turning against him? I wasn't friends with him. I became an acquaintance of him. And let me tell you something. Nobody would be a friend of mine who'd try to bamboozle me. So with that, I'm going to say that's my version of telling it like it is. Now, if you give me 1 minute, you're going to get to hear somebody besides me who also has a lot of information on this particular topic and can approach it from some different perspectives. And I think you're going to find it very, very interesting. That's why that second cup is here, as I said at the beginning. So give us 1 minute, don't go away, and watch what happens next. Hello, we're back, and as you can see, I have a guest here. And some of you may be very surprised to see who the guest is, and it would be none other than Bill Greiner, who is a former town councilor and who was very active in the 2012 election and was obviously on a little different side than I was during this whole Rick Bullock, does he owe taxes or doesn't he, controversy. So I thought, well, you know, considering it is a year later and there are still so many unanswered questions, I thought it would be fantastic to say to Bill, so Bill, you know, we're not personal enemies. Why not come on in and let's talk about this? And let's talk about this whole subject from your perspective, because you've been in town longer than me and you have a lot more background on this issue than I do. So welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Kathy.
I'm sure a lot of people right now are falling out of their chairs thinking, never thought we'd see the two of them on the same set, and here we are.
It's not about personality,
That's
it's about
right.
an issue.
That's right, it's about an issue. That's right. So, you heard what I had to say while you were waiting.
I did.
And, you know, obviously a lot of time has gone by, and we all heard Bullock's comments of a year ago, and nothing's changed. So what do you think about all this?
Well, it's interesting. So then listening to you talking about having followed up with Crystal, I had done the same thing, you know, probably 3 or 4 weeks after the election. Did, in fact, you get the notification from Rick's attorney as to who the new trustees would be, and her response was no. And in fact, she showed me an email that she had sent to his attorney and an email response back saying, no, I'm still waiting for it, I'll let you know. Subsequent to that, I think she sent him a couple of other emails right around tax bill time.
Yep.
One was around June and one
Yep.
was in November, and he just didn't respond. She got no response. So from her perspective, she legally has to continue to send the
Of
tax
course.
notices out in the same manner that she's always sent them out. And as you stated, they've all come back uncollected mail, and as a result, the tax bills continue to ramp up. What that tells me is that it's the same game, different day, meaning that we'll skirt who's really responsible for these things. He loses an election, so it's really not a big deal. Would have been interesting to see if he won the election, would he have really followed through any of that stuff? And I think
Good
it'd
point.
be conjecture for us to lay a guess at that. But the fact is, he didn't win. The taxes have mounted, as you've said, and gone up by about 40% or so.
Yeah.
And that's because we've added 2 full tax payments since then, the first half of 2012 and the second half of 2012. And I think what you'll see is that sometime this summer, you will actually see a payment made. Because as you noted, Kathy, when you did the original show with Rick in February of 2012, there were outstanding tax bills from the second half of 11.
All right.
And then
So the 3-year window.
exactly. And so now we're going to be in that 3-year, second half of 10, all of 11. And now you're going to be in that window where if that 10 isn't cleared up, that property will be liened and sold. And so you will see a check, I'm sure, come in, just as in the old days, it'll be one check, and it will take care of the absolute minimum. And each of those 10 properties will have their 2010 taxes cleared up, and there will still be some balance of $60,000 or $70,000 that will be owed collectively on those properties. And the idea behind that is to allow the properties not to be confiscated, but to continue to play the tax game.
All right.
You make another point that I had talked about earlier, and going back to last year, and that was gaming the system. I don't. If somebody's a private individual, if your next door neighbor, my next door neighbor, wants to do what Rick has been doing, while it has some impacts and implications in the town, that's not my issue. If you have an elected title behind your name, that becomes my issue. As an elected official, you shouldn't do that. And he wasn't the only one that was doing it. There was another elected official. When it was brought forward, not long after that, he did pay his taxes and has been current on his taxes, as far as I can tell, ever since then. So my issue is that when you have an elected official that's doing that, that raises that bar.
Absolutely.
Even more so.
Absolutely. They're supposed to be setting an example for everybody.
Exactly, and not gaming the system for whatever their motivations might be, and we can get into motivation.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that because, I mean, obviously you have a lot of holdings as a businessman and so on. And, why would somebody play that game and be willing to pay the penalties and fines and so on?
Financially, it makes no sense, Kathy. I think a couple of years ago, the penalty was 18%. I think now state statute has it around 12%. Still a hefty fee in today's interest rate environment, where if you put money in a savings instrument, you're not even going to get 1%. So why would you put it, not pay it, leave it in the bank, make 1%, turn around and pay the town of Bedford 12%? That's a really foolish equation.
The one would think, yeah.
So there's 2 explanations for it. One would be that by having use of that money, you can make more than you're paying. So maybe there's another investment that maybe it's worth more reinvesting in real estate or other ventures that would yield more than 12%.
Okay.
So you play with the house's money.
Yeah.
Not sure that there are investments out there, but that would be one motivation. The other motivation would be because you either didn't want to pay taxes philosophically, or you felt you were above the taxes, or as someone had said to me, maybe you feel that you are owed something by the town of Bedford, because if you've been involved and active in the town for so long, the town owes you, and therefore you can operate by a different set of rules.
So that goes
than
back to that
somebody else.
arrogance.
Correct. And I honestly, I don't know which it is. I can't sit here and say that he's definitely doing it because he's got some investment opportunities which yield him 23% a year, so it makes sense for him to use the town as his bank. Or that he just feels that he's above everybody else and can do what he chooses to do. I frankly don't know which it is. either way, I don't think it's acceptable if you're a public official.
No, and I don't think it's acceptable even for a non-public official. You know, I don't like having to pay taxes. None of us do. I mean, obviously, it's money out of our pockets that every single one of us could find another use for, no matter who we are, no matter what our income is.
And you mentioned, you mentioned everybody's responsibility. So I own, as you mentioned, I have a lot of properties in town. Most of them are commercial properties, and so the tenants that are in those properties don't send kids to the schools, but they have to contribute towards the school. They don't have anything to do with the football fields and the soccer fields and the tennis courts, but they pay a portion of money towards recreation because that's what a community is all about. Everybody pays their portion of a tax bill, and it's up to the town council and the school board to set what their budgets are going to be, and the voters approve them. And if the voters approve them, you need to pay it whether you agree with it or not, whether it's on the local level or at the federal level. If you don't like defense spending, that's irrelevant. You need a portion of your tax bill is going to go to protect the country. You can't pick and choose as much as some people might like to pick and choose. It doesn't work that way. And
I mean, in reality, why should any of us as individuals have to serve as somebody else's finance company or bank?
Correct. And the other thing that got me is what I felt was his lack of candor. So when you had mentioned one of the properties, I think it may have been property number 4, Starfire, where it was a trust, and Rick told you that, well, he had sold that in 2004.
Yeah, he did that with actually 2 properties,
Yeah, so what's interesting is that I don't believe that this, so if you have a trust, so if you have a trust and you want to sell that trust to me, and we're not related, there's no relation at all, I can buy that from you. You have to pay a transfer tax on that, and I have to pay a transfer tax on that. If you had a trust and you wanted to put your husband on that trust, or you had it in your own name and you wanted to put that property in a trust for you, there is no transfer tax because it's the identical ownership, or in the case of you and your husband, spousal. So the state does not levy a transfer tax. They only levy a transfer tax when a property is sold from one party to an unrelated different party, and you actually have to fill out a transfer tax reform and an affidavit that there's no special consideration when you make that transfer. So he claims he did that in '04, and therefore somehow he should have been off the trustee. Well, if he didn't pay a transfer tax, so I believe that the property probably was sold from entity X to entity Y. But when the paperwork was sent to the state, to avoid paying transfer taxes, that would have meant that he was essentially selling to himself. If he did sell to a third party...
So that would be the avoidance of even yet another tax.
Correct. And now I truly believe in that case that he did just simply change entities, which you're allowed to do without paying a transfer tax. There could be estate planning reasons and that. My point being is to say that he sold it in '04, well, if you didn't pay a transfer tax, how could you really have sold it to somebody else in the first place? Yeah. And for a lot of people, Kathy, this is in the weeds. So you and I, have a pretty good understanding of some of this stuff because we've both researched it. And, the average person at home gets lost when you talk about a transfer tax or buying it for this reason and selling it for that reason. The bottom line is, in the cases of the trust where somebody's a trustee, no matter who the beneficiaries are, if you're the trustee, you have a fiduciary responsibility to pay those taxes, period. And so when he's told you and the people in Bedford that he had resigned from those trusts, he was no longer the trustee, somebody else was going to be appointed. If in fact that was true, it's been 10 or 11 months, what about those poor beneficiaries? Who's looking out for them?
Yeah, and it wouldn't explain that while he was trustee, though, that didn't get paid, would it?
Right. Exactly. So there's 2 issues there. There were 2 other properties you mentioned: Creative Entertainment, which, and then there was I think it was Mary Street.
Yeah, that was Mary Street. Yeah.
And then his own home on 11 Meeting House.
Yes,
those were in LLCs, and with an LLC, you have to register with the state, and everything is very transparent. So in a trust, if you had a trust that owned a piece of property, I couldn't go online and figure out who your trustees are, and who your if you had a co-trustee or if you had beneficiaries. I can only see that you're the main trustee.
Okay.
In an LLC, you have to register who the managers are and who the members are. And so in those 2 things, Rick was the only person listed as a manager. The only person listed as a member. And you have an electronic signature when you make those filings every single year with the state of New Hampshire. So when I brought that issue up and you said, well, he came and he paid those, because he first realized he was responsible for those,
well, that's a
he knew he couldn't talk around that issue anymore.
Well, that's something I didn't understand. I mean, how can you live in a house and have a business in a house, and whether there's an LLC or not, say, well, I didn't know I had to pay the taxes.
And that was
I
much
mean,
harder for him to talk around that. So the easiest thing to do was simply to pay those taxes.
Yeah,
And
and
I
those
think
were the
that's what
ones that got
happened.
paid.
Right. And I don't think it had to,
Albeit they're in arrears now.
they are in arrears now. And again, I think it would have been interesting to see what he would have done had he been reelected. You point out correctly that he is up for reelection. The filing period, I think, is the end of this month.
Yeah, my
for school.
understanding is he's not going to go for reelection.
You don't think he's going to run for reelection?
I don't think he is, no. I don't think he is.
Based on the fact that the tax issue is there, or based on the fact that
Well,
he...
I wouldn't be surprised if that's in there, because I think he knows darn well that if he were to renounce for reelection on that, these same issues are going to come right back.
Yeah.
I mean, they haven't gone away.
No,
Clearly, they
they've
have
just
not
been,
gone away.
they've quieted, and I think you're
Yeah.
raising it now, and I would have raised it shortly, and if he doesn't put his name up for reelection, I'm not going to raise the issue. From a campaign perspective, if he does choose to run, I would. One thing that I'll say that's interesting, we both have our opinions, and regardless of what you or I think, the average person in Bedford last year didn't believe what he was selling.
Well, that has to be true.
And
Yeah,
he
that has
must
to be true.
realize that at this point in
Yeah.
time.
And do you think that's one of the reasons for this Bedford positively, to try to
so.
recreate an image for
I
himself?
think so. And again, look, I'm all for people doing good things for good reasons. Some people, do things, because they have altruistic values. Other people do things because they have an agenda. I can remember back in the mid '90s when a couple of organizations, including one I was involved with, had approached Gene and Rick about setting some tables up at the polling place at McKelvey, and Gene deferred to Rick. Rick said absolutely not.
Now, Gene, you're referring
Gene
to Van
Van
Loan, right? The former moderator.
Exactly.
Okay.
He said no. Rick's comment was no. We're here to get people in and out. It's too crowded, too chaotic. No changes. So nothing. We're here to vote. No. If I have to say yes to one organization, his direct quote was, if I say yes to you guys, then I have to say yes to the Boy Scouts, and then I have to say yes to the Girl Scouts. And he said, you can see how complicated, how difficult it would be. End of discussion. Fast forward to last year, and it seemed like there wasn't an organization in Bedford that wasn't dragged and
That's been
invited
the case
to the
for
polls.
the past couple of years. Yeah.
There's an agenda there. So to your point, this positively thing, I think it's great if there are really some altruistic motives there. If it's to have an agenda to build up one's personality or to resurrect an image, that's...
Well, I mean, it doesn't seem, it's not like they're out there fundraising or have a goal that they're going to participate in, raise money for, or whatever in town. I mean, they send out emails that basically use the town calendar to say the town council meeting is Wednesday, the school board meeting is whatever, straight off the town calendar, and half the time they have wrong dates and such. And then they'll pull out of newspapers that, some organization is having a penny sale or the Historical Society is meeting or whatever. And this goes out to however many people are on their mailing list. And then the other thing that they do is they take his old antique car, or whatever it is, and show up at different events like Town Day or the Lurgio race there, the road race, to raise money. And they'll show up and shoot some tape to get a TV show out of it. They're not contributing to the organizations who are sponsoring these events. They're not raising money for them. They're not working on the events.
They're not volunteering?
No, they're showing up and doing their little show so that they have something to put on BCTV that says Bedford positively. They did, I guess in December, I should correct that in December they did say they were willing to be a drop-off point for Toys for Tots, one of many, many in town, and apparently their friends did drop their toys there instead of bringing them to the police station or any of the
Walmart or
other.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, we all know the police department, that's been a big thing of theirs every single year.
Correct.
And they collect literally hundreds and hundreds. So why Bedford positively felt the need to hone in on it, I suppose, to get their name in the paper.
Low-hanging fruit to get your name
sort
out
of.
there.
Yeah, sort of. So, I mean, what the purpose of it doesn't seem to be anything other than to kind of put themselves in a little public, kind of like a little public relations ploy more than anything.
Now, have you talked to Rick about this issue since summertime, or is
No.
it not?
No.
This is something just kind of gelled with you recently?
Well, as I explained before, any issue that I've ever worked on, I've always, and again, it comes from all these years of lobbying and such, and I'm basically quizzy. And anything that I've worked on, I always tried to follow through to see what happened, particularly if there was something that maybe I felt I should have done more of, or what have you. I really feel strongly, and I really feel strongly that if on my show that misinformation was given out, I mean, I think that I have the duty that if people are going to turn on and say, I'm going to watch Kathy's show, that they should be able to trust that if I screwed up on something, or that if I put out wrong information, that I'm grown up enough to come back and say, you know what, I'm really sorry. We didn't give you the right information, and here it is. That's kind of how I felt on this. I mean, I did that basic follow-up like I always do to kind of find out how things turned out from that last show. And then when I heard how things turned out, I thought, whoa. Because I'll tell you, I don't take it lightly if somebody is untruthful with me. And I think I kind of ended, you know, the first part of the show trying to clarify that if people are out there saying, oh my gosh, I thought she was big friends with Rick, and how could she do this to a friend? You know, I was an acquaintance of his. We did a show together. You know, we had some subjects we talked about. I have not been a lifelong friend of his. We do not get out socially. We do not hang out together. None of those things exist. And quite frankly, call me a pain, but I expect my friends to be honest with me. And when somebody comes on a show with me, I expect, especially if it were a friend, that they wouldn't try to bamboozle me.
No, and I would take that a step further and say that in general, one would expect people in general to be honest.
Yes.
Be upfront, and you know, if you have somebody in your show that you've never met before or that you've known, as you say, for a friend for a long time, you expect them to be as straightforward and as honest as they can, because if they want to pull one over on you as a host or me as a host, that's one thing. You're pulling something over on a community.
That's right. Exactly.
And that's where the disservice ends
Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, I won't stand for it, you know, and there is no doubt in my mind that I will be vilified greatly when the show gets on YouTube and on BCTV. I am sure that Mr. Bullock will howl, you know, that I'm a terrible, terrible person, that I'm lying about him, that I'm part of the conspiracy. When he finds out that I actually have you sitting here, God knows. I mean, I'm sure we have some kind of deal going, that now we're in cahoots for some terrible reason in Bedford, but we'll all be part of that whole persecution, no doubt. And, you know, to that I say, oh, baloney.
It's just a way to deflect from the real issue.
You know, I mean, if people want to chatter that way, then they're free to chatter that way. I don't lay awake nights worrying about people who chit-chat over nothing, quite frankly. And I don't think you do either.
No, not at all.
Not at all is right. Well, I don't know. What do you think about all this? I mean, as I said, here we are a year later, and I agree with you that now that they're getting into that territory where the town literally can, you know, take possession of some of these properties.
You'll see a check come back in like he did in 2010, where there was a check brought in by the paralegal from his lawyer. So in the past, it was always Rick would bring in one check for X number of dollars, and then the instructions were pay the, you know, the taxes that are the furthest in arrears, so that you can't take it. So you'd kind of knock that part off, and you'd have, you know, another 6 months or a year to build up before it was leaned again. And so so in 2010, a paralegal brought that check in with the instructions to do exactly that.
Amazing.
And then nothing was done last year except for those two properties that you mentioned, and it was because there was really no way to talk around that. That was too obvious for people to see. It certainly appears that way,
doesn't it? Yeah.
But this year you will see a check that will probably be brought in by a paralegal or somebody that's not Rick. I can't imagine Rick, even though in the old days he did sign the checks himself, somebody else will do it on behalf of these 10 properties, and here's how you allocate these payments, and we'll get caught up. From 2010 will no longer be an issue. It'll just be 2.5 years of taxes, all of 11, all of 12, and then the first half of 2013.
You know, you heard me say that if we allow people to do these kind of things, essentially we're empowering them, and essentially we're allowing them to kick sand in our faces. Do you think he's kicking sand in our faces?
I think he is, and you bring up a good point that most people don't understand about the tax anticipation notes. So I think that the collection of the properties that I own and control, we pay, I would say, in excess of $500,000 in property taxes a year in Bedford. So if I didn't like something or didn't like somebody, wanted to kick sand in somebody's face, that's a lot of money.
Yes, it is.
That's something where now all of a sudden, because I have a beef with the town or I want to prove that I'm bigger or better than somebody, now the town has to go and scramble to make arrangements to meet payroll, to meet the obligations that it has, and it will.
And
but
all of us
come at
have
a
to pay for it.
cost.
Exactly.
And if you can't go
Exactly.
down that slippery slope. If somebody's late on their taxes because of health reasons, a job issue, family issues, there's a whole laundry list that
Exactly.
that to me is off the table. You don't even talk about that stuff.
Exactly. And they'll get it solved.
And even if they're an elected official and have those issues, you know, that just because you're an elected official doesn't mean that you don't have the same leeway if you've lost your job or you've had that. But if you've got the assets, and I would venture to say that Mr. Bullock has the assets, and you just choose not to redeploy assets or simply pay what you have an obligation to pay, that's the problem.
I think it makes fools of all of us, quite frankly. I mean, none of us like paying taxes.
Right.
And, you know, a lot of people in town who have been paying taxes for a long, long time, who are lifelong residents who, you know, no longer have kids in schools or no longer probably partake of any of the benefits of town, still have to send that check out.
Absolutely.
And it's just plain unfair because they're doing it and you're doing it and I'm doing it and none of us.
And I'll tell you what, Kathy, there are a lot of people who are doing it and probably have less wherewithal to do it
That's right.
than Mr. Bullock has.
That's right.
That's what makes it even worse, is that knowing that somebody has the ability to do it and for whichever reason chooses not to do it, doesn't, and there's somebody else that might sacrifice a heating bill, might sacrifice some other...
Not pick up a prescription that's a ridiculous
because
cost or whatever.
they want to pay their property taxes.
That's right, because again, nobody wants that anvil or
Hanging
whatever
over them.
hanging over
Because
them. Exactly.
most people
Your home.
don't game it enough like Rick does to say that if I miss this tax payment, am I going to lose my house next month? They don't realize they actually have 3 years before that could happen.
It's true. It's true.
So he understands that you can game it, but somebody who, as you say, might say, I can't afford my prescription medication because I have to pay this bill because I don't want to lose it next month. That's the real injustice.
Now, you know, let me ask you something. You've been around town a long time, and you obviously know a lot of these people way better than I do, particularly, you know, you were on the council and such. Have you seen evidence of this kind of arrogance or kind of, I don't want to sound crude, but kind of that screw you attitude of Rick Bullock and other things as well?
Honestly, no.
No?
I've seen some people that have agendas, and I think look, a lot of people have
I mean,
agendas.
from him.
From him, I think this was an issue for him when there was a talk about having the town common, which we now have. You know, back in the mid '90s, when there was private money that would have paid for that, all of that back then, because it was in his backyard. He pointed his finger at Mobile and claimed that his water was contaminated and his property was destroyed. And if all of that was the case, he wouldn't be living there today, right? He would have been.
One would think.
One would have think
if you were afraid of all that.
He would have gone, and Mobile would have, or somebody, whoever ruined his property, would have had to make retribution, you know, to that. And so a lot of that was noise because he simply didn't want something in his backyard. You know, again, that was his own personal issue. Does it rise to the above of playing games with the taxes? I think this is worse than that. I mean, I'm okay if you don't want to have a park next to you. I didn't like the fact that he, you know, took it out on a small business person that owned the gas station and Mobil Oil, but it was easy for him to vilify them.
Well, that kind of points to a little arrogance, doesn't it?
Yeah, this I think tops the cake when you're willing to sit there and, my words, lie to people, be it you, be it to the residents of Bedford as to who owns them, and I'm going to do this and this is going to happen. If he had done, if all of a sudden Joe Blow had come in as a new trustee, I would have looked pretty foolish, right?
Yeah.
And my issue was
exactly.
I didn't think he was telling the truth, and I think it's clear that he wasn't telling the truth. And to me, that's the ultimate in arrogance, is when you lie and you think that nobody is going to catch you in your lie, and you can just continue to go on your own track and not worry about anybody else and be different than everybody else. That to me is the height of arrogance.
And I mean, truthfully, if he really was telling the truth, why would he not have set everything straight right away?
Why
would he allow a show like today to even be done? That people would be able to still question him a year later. That's what blows my mind.
I think you're right. I think he probably doesn't run for office, and he feels that he doesn't have to answer that question anymore.
Well,
So he doesn't. So he probably didn't calculate on you following up.
I'm sure not, because I do think, I truly do believe that Rick Bullock figured that because it was a show that was well watched, that maybe I have such a sorry little ego that I'd go, oh, I got a lot of audience on that show, and be all flattered and, maybe listen to whatever anybody was willing to hand me. And to that I would say, Rick, big mistake.
No, and I'm glad you did the show. I think it's good. It, I think, puts the light back on the statements that he made to you and holds him accountable, and it holds other people accountable, knowing that you can come in and BS your way around or lie about any topic, and that's fine. You just won't get away with it. And I think that's a good message that you're sending there, is come in and you want to play me for what you want to do, that's fine. But ultimately, the truth is going to come out in the end.
And quite honestly, and I don't want to sound schmaltzy here, but I will say this. I think another, side issue, or maybe even a central issue to all of this, is Rick certainly got a lot of press and had a lot of opportunity, including on my show, to demonize Crystal Dion. And, more or less indicating that he was the subject of all her, vile activities, that she had a vengeance out for him and a vendetta and all the rest of it, and was tied in with you and other people who don't like him and yada, yada, yada. And, I mean, quite frankly, I can't imagine that Crystal would waste her time and energy on any single taxpayer, including Rick Bullock. She has a big job and she does it.
And at the time, as you recall, she was doing two jobs. She
Yes,
was doing
that's
her
right.
job and she was the acting town manager.
That's correct.
So the last thing, she's going to do her job, and she's not going to allow herself to get caught up in extraneous activity
correct.
when she's got a family at home and everything else going on.
Exactly. And, in the process, I mean, she took, I would call it some abuse.
She took some heat.
And I think I have some responsibility for that because of the fact that I allowed that discussion to go on. And, she has gotten hammered on other issues, and we're not even going to get into other issues. But, I mean, the fact is that it happened. And was that unfair to her? Yeah. And I think that, in reality, that people, if they believed everything that Rick Bullock had to say, somewhere along the line have to start separating and recognize, at the very least, that the idea that she would dedicate her life to trying to make him look bad is in itself ludicrous.
Yeah, it's foolish.
Yeah. So, I mean, if nothing else, that needs to be said too. And I think it's only fair to say that. And again, like I said earlier in the show, she's always been cooperative. No matter how crazy the frenzy got, or, how spirited people were getting in their conversations, I have never seen any evidence that she didn't do her job.
No, I think she works hard. And is she perfect? Absolutely not.
100%.
Nobody's perfect. But I don't think she has an agenda. I've never, when I sat on the council and she was a department head, never was brought to my attention that she had a vendetta or an agenda about anybody.
And as it should be. And again, I mean, obviously, you took hits. I've taken hits. I'm sure I'm going to take a lot more hits.
I think we'll both take hits.
Oh, yeah. Well, especially now. But again, I mean, some of these folks, and I think Rick Bullock is one of those people that doesn't recognize it's not personal. I mean, maybe because I worked as a lobbyist for years. I mean, there were situations where I worked on some very explosive issues. And the person who was on the other side of the issue, man, I mean, we had no trouble going for the jugular during hearings and so on. But it ended there.
Right.
It didn't affect our personal relationship. We could go out to lunch together and talk and share stories and be friends and socialize together and such. Or
come together on another issue where you're both on the same side.
Exactly, because you didn't burn your bridge. Because next month there might be an issue that both of you are working on together. And obviously you put your combined strength together.
Yeah.
And this is something that some people don't understand, and I don't think Rick Bullock understands it. You disagreed with him, I'm disagreeing with him, so we're the enemies forevermore. I really doubt we will ever be invited to his house for tea or...
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, me too. Well, we've talked a long time, and again, I'm sure there are people sitting there going, never thought I'd see that.
Well, thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thank you for coming, because, I mean, when you were asked, you really had no idea what I was going to do.
No.
And you had no idea if I was going to be
coming at me or
screaming
not
and yelling
coming.
or anything else, you know. But we're both grown up, and we both know how to act professionally. So, who knows? We might be working on the same side of the fence on something.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for coming.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you. And I hope all of you learned something today. And I hope all of you really recognize that those of us who go on BCTV, we really do try. We really do, no matter what our styles. We really do try to tell it like it is in our own fashion and on our own shows. And, you know, that's important. We hope you'll continue watching. And until the next time, bye-bye.